The air in Rome, though seemingly vibrant with the ceaseless hum of a sprawling empire, carried an almost imperceptible tremor, a growing disquiet beneath its grand facade. Julius Caesar, a name that echoed with the thunder of legions and the whispers of unprecedented power, stood at its zenith. His rise had been meteoric, a relentless ascent, fueled by unmatched military genius and a towering ambition that dwarfed even the most audacious dreams of his predecessors. From the muddy fields of Gaul to the sun-baked sands of Egypt, his triumphs were legendary, his name synonymous with conquest. He had crossed the Rubicon, shattered the Republic's old guard, and now, as Dictator Perpetuo, his authority was absolute, his will the law of the land. Yet this very power, so meticulously acquired, cast a long and chilling shadow, breeding both fervent loyalty and seething resentment. Among those who watched Caesar with increasingly troubled eyes were two men whose fates would become inextricably linked with his. Marcus Junius Brutus, a man revered for his integrity and his unwavering devotion to the ancient ideals of the Roman Republic, found himself in an agonizing moral crucible. He was Caesar's friend, his protege, perhaps even his illegitimate son, and yet the dictator's burgeoning authority felt like a dagger plunged into the heart of everything Brutus held sacred. Rome, he believed, was meant to be a republic, a commonwealth of free citizens, not the personal dominion of a single man. His convictions were pure, born of a deep-seated love for the liberty his ancestors had fought and died for. Standing in stark contrast was Gaius Cassius Longinus, a man whose motivations were less idealistic, more visceral. Cassius harbored a profound personal animosity towards Caesar, a simmering resentment born of slights both real and perceived. He saw tyranny not just as an abstract concept, but as a tangible threat that would inevitably crush all who stood in its path, including himself. Where Brutus wrestled with philosophy, Cassius burned with a cynical pragmatism, convinced that Caesar's ambition knew no bounds and that the Republic's survival demanded a drastic, immediate intervention. Their initial clandestine meetings were shrouded in the oppressive cloak of paranoia, whispered conversations held in flickering torchlight, each word a dangerous spark. The perceived threat to Roman liberty, amplified by Caesar's increasingly regal demeanor and his dismissal of republican traditions, became the fertile ground for their conspiracy. Brutus, torn between his deep personal affection for Caesar and his fervent commitment to the Republic, found himself on a precipice. The internal struggle was immense, each night a torment of conflicting loyalties. Could he betray a friend to save an ideal? Could Rome truly flourish under a perpetual dictator? Cassius, with his sharp, persuasive intellect, relentlessly chipped away at Brutus's doubts, painting vivid pictures of a future enslaved by despotism. Finally, the decision was made. The die was cast, shrouded in a secrecy so profound it felt like a living entity. The impending Ides of March loomed, a date innocent in itself, yet destined to become etched in the annals of history as a day of profound betrayal. But even as the conspirators meticulously planned their deed, the universe seemed to offer its own chilling warnings. Caesar, for all his earthly power, was not immune to the supernatural. Omens abounded. Strange dreams plagued his wife Calpurnia, predicting his death. A soothsayer warned him directly to beware the Ides of March, and even the entrails of sacrificial animals spoke of ill fortune. Yet, with a fatalistic pride, Caesar dismissed them all, convinced of his own invincibility, his destiny seemingly unassailable. He laughed at the warnings, waved away the fears of his loved ones, sealing his own tragic fate with every defiant gesture. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The fateful morning of March 15th, 44 BC, dawned with an ominous stillness, a deceptive tranquility that belied the monumental events about to unfold. Julius Caesar, radiating his usual aura of unshakable confidence, made his way towards the Roman Senate. He dismissed the lingering shadows of Calpurnia's nightmares and the soothsayer's cryptic warnings with a wave of his hand. His mind focused on the day's agenda, on the continuing consolidation of his unparalleled power. He walked into the Curia Pompeia, the temporary meeting place for the Senate, seemingly oblivious to the immediate visceral danger that lurked within its hallowed walls, a danger woven into the very fabric of the gathering. As he entered, the conspirators, a chilling tableau of feigned deference and deadly intent, surrounded him. They pressed close, ostensibly to present petitions, their movements a carefully choreographed dance of deception. Then the first blade flashed, a sudden, brutal glint of steel. Publius Servilius Casca struck first, a glancing blow to Caesar's neck, a clumsy but undeniable act of violence that shattered the facade of civility. The air immediately thickened with the acrid smell of fear and blood. Caesar, momentarily stunned, fought back, his powerful hands grasping at his attackers, his voice bellowing in disbelief and fury. He was a lion, cornered, but still formidable. But the numbers were overwhelming. Blade after blade found its mark, a relentless, savage assault. The Senate chamber, usually a forum for eloquent debate, transformed into a bloody arena, echoing with the sounds of struggle and the gasps of dying breath. Amidst the swirling chaos, as Caesar desperately tried to fend off his assailants, his eyes, now clouded with pain and confusion, locked onto a familiar face. There, among the throng of assassins, stood Brutus, his friend, his protégé, his trusted confidant, holding a dagger. The sight was a dagger to Caesar's soul, a betrayal so profound it eclipsed the physical wounds. "Et tu, brute?" he whispered, his voice barely audible, choked with despair and the ultimate comprehension of his demise. In that moment, the fight left him. He pulled his toga over his head, a final gesture of dignity, and collapsed at the foot of Pompey's statue, staining its base with his blood. The immediate aftermath was a maelstrom of terror and confusion. The Senate chamber emptied in a panicked rush, senators scattering like startled birds, their robes flapping as they fled the horrific scene. Brutus, his hands still stained with Caesar's blood, stood over the fallen dictator, his face a complex mask of anguish and conviction. He and Cassius, along with the other conspirators, emerged into the Roman forum, their daggers still dripping, their voices raised in a desperate attempt to justify their actions. They proclaimed liberty, declared the Republic saved, and called for the populace to rejoice in their newfound freedom. But their words rang hollow, lost in the palpable fear and uncertainty that gripped the city. The people of Rome, accustomed to Caesar's firm hand and the stability he had brought, were not celebrating. They were stunned, bewildered, and deeply afraid. Amidst this disarray, a figure of cunning and calculated ambition moved with silent precision. Mark Antony. Caesar's loyal general, he initially feigned cooperation with the conspirators, offering a truce, even shaking their blood-stained hands. His demeanor was one of sorrow and conciliation, a masterful performance designed to lull them into a false sense of security. But beneath the veneer of grief, Antony seethed with a burning desire for vengeance, a cold fury that promised retribution. He secured permission to deliver Caesar's eulogy, a seemingly innocuous request that would prove to be the conspirators' gravest miscalculation. At Caesar's funeral, before the shocked and grieving Roman populace, Antony delivered a speech that would forever be etched in the annals of political manipulation. He began with measured words, praising Brutus and the conspirators as honorable men, subtly weaving in Caesar's virtues, his military triumphs, his generosity to the Roman people, and his refusal of the crown. He produced Caesar's will, revealing bequests to every Roman citizen, a stark contrast to the liberator's claims of tyranny. Then, with a dramatic flourish, he unveiled Caesar's bloodied toga, pointing to each dagger wound, attributing them to specific conspirators, his voice rising with each revelation. He did not explicitly accuse, but his words, laced with pathos and carefully chosen rhetoric, ignited a slow-burning rage in the hearts of the common people. He subtly turned public opinion, transforming Caesar from a tyrannical dictator into a martyred hero, and the conspirators from liberators into ruthless villains. The crowd, whipped into a frenzy of grief and indignation, now thirsted for revenge, a thirst Antony had meticulously cultivated. The seeds of civil war had been sown, watered by Caesar's blood and nurtured by Antony's cunning. The sudden, brutal vacuum left by Caesar's assassination plunged Rome into a dangerous abyss of political instability. The conspirators, blinded by their fervent belief in a restored republic, had utterly misjudged the public's sentiment and the depth of loyalty Caesar commanded. Their desperate cries for liberty were drowned out by the rising tide of outrage and sorrow stirred by Mark Antony's masterful eulogy. Rome, once a beacon of order, now teetered on the brink of chaos, ripe for new contenders to seize the reins of power. It was into this volatile landscape that a young, unassuming figure emerged, one who would irrevocably shape the future of Rome. Octavian. Just 18 years old, Caesar's adopted heir was a mere boy in the eyes of many seasoned politicians. Yet he possessed an ambition and a strategic mind that belied his youth. He arrived in Rome from Apollonia, initially met with skepticism and even outright disdain from established figures who saw him as an upstart. But Octavian carried a powerful inheritance: Caesar's name, his vast personal fortune, and, crucially, the unwavering loyalty of Caesar's veteran legions. He deftly navigated the treacherous political waters, first aligning himself with the Senate against Antony, then, with calculated precision, turning his attention to Antony himself. He understood that to truly avenge his adoptive father, he needed to consolidate power, and that meant forming unlikely alliances. The path to vengeance soon forged an unholy trinity. Octavian, the calculating heir, eventually reconciled with Mark Antony, the charismatic general whose fiery rhetoric had ignited the Roman populace. They were joined by Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, a less prominent but politically connected ally, who offered a veneer of legitimacy and military support. Thus, in 43 BC, the Second Triumvirate was officially formed, a pact of immense power, united by a singular, chilling purpose: to avenge Julius Caesar and eliminate all who stood in their way. This was not the informal, pragmatic alliance of Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. This was a legally sanctioned dictatorship, granted sweeping powers to restore order and punish the conspirators. Their first act, a horrifying demonstration of their iron will, was the implementation of ruthless prescriptions. Lists of enemies, both real and perceived, were drawn up, condemning thousands to death and confiscation of property. Senators, equestrians, and even ordinary citizens who had voiced support for the conspirators or simply possessed inconvenient wealth found their names on these terrifying lists. The streets of Rome ran red with blood as agents of the Triumvirate hunted down their victims. Cicero, the celebrated orator who had vehemently opposed Antony, was among the most prominent casualties, his head and hands displayed in the Forum as a grim warning. This brutal purge, though ostensibly aimed at punishing Caesar's assassins and their allies, also served to eliminate political rivals and fill the Triumvirate's war chests. It was a dark period, a stark reminder that the fight for the Republic had descended into a brutal struggle for absolute power. With internal opposition crushed and their resources bolstered, the Triumvirate turned its formidable gaze eastward. Brutus and Cassius, having fled Rome in the chaotic aftermath of the assassination, were now raising armies in Greece and Asia Minor, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. The strategic preparations for war were immense, mobilizing vast legions and naval fleets. This was no longer just about personal retribution, it was a battle for the very soul of Rome, a struggle that would determine whether the Republic would endure or be irrevocably transformed. The stage was set for a monumental clash, a civil war of unprecedented scale. Yet, even as they forged this powerful alliance and pursued their common enemies with ruthless efficiency, the seeds of future discord were already being sown within the Triumvirate itself. Octavian, ever the meticulous planner, viewed Antony with a mixture of respect and suspicion, recognizing his charisma but also his impulsiveness. Antony, in turn, saw Octavian as a young upstart, a necessary but ultimately disposable tool in his own quest for ultimate power. Lepidus, often sidelined, harbored his own resentments. This growing internal friction, in subtle undercurrent beneath their united front, hinted at future betrayals. Even as they marched relentlessly towards their immediate foes, the assassins of Caesar, whose fate was now sealed by the very forces they had inadvertently unleashed. The conspirators, Brutus and Cassius, had indeed fled to the east, seeking refuge and rallying support among the various Roman provinces and client kingdoms. Their flight was not an act of cowardice, but a strategic retreat, a desperate attempt to gather the necessary forces to defend the republic they believed they had saved. Brutus, in particular, carried a heavy burden. The act of assassination, though committed with what he saw as noble intentions, gnawed at his conscience. He had sacrificed his friendship with Caesar, his mentor, for an ideal, and now that ideal had plunged Rome into a brutal civil war. The psychological toll was immense. He was haunted by his actions, the moral weight of the bloodshed, and the ever-present spectre of Caesar's ghost. A silent accuser in his tormented mind. Cassius, more pragmatic and less burdened by moral introspection, focused solely on military preparations, his resentment towards Caesar fueling his resolve. Their journey eastward was a frantic race against time, a desperate scramble to consolidate power and raise armies before the Triumvirate could descend upon them. They levied troops, exacted tribute, and forged alliances, transforming themselves from senators into military commanders. Brutus, despite his internal struggles, proved to be a capable leader, inspiring loyalty and respect. Cassius, with his keen strategic mind, meticulously planned their defenses. They understood the gravity of the impending confrontation. This was not merely a battle, but a struggle for the very soul of Rome. The stage was finally set for the decisive clash near Philippi, a city in Macedon. The forces of the Triumvirate, led by Octavian and Mark Antony, were formidable, experienced, and burning with a desire for vengeance. Brutus and Cassius, though numerically inferior, commanded legions hardened by years of campaigning, united by a shared belief in the Republic, or at least a shared opposition to the Triumvirate. The strategic landscape was complex, with rolling plains and hills offering both advantages and disadvantages to each side. Both factions engaged in intricate maneuvers, attempting to gain the upper hand, each commander certain of their own tactical brilliance. The first Battle of Philippi was a brutal and bloody affair, a chaotic maelstrom of clashing shields and desperate cries. On the right flank, Brutus's forces surged forward with unexpected ferocity, overwhelming Octavian's legions and even capturing his camp. Octavian himself, ill and reportedly having a premonition, had narrowly escaped capture. However, on the left flank, Antony's seasoned troops proved more resilient. They outmaneuvered Cassius's forces, pushing them back relentlessly. The battle raged for hours, a testament to the ferocity and determination of both sides. As dusk approached, the outcome remained uncertain, a tragic testament to the fog of war. Cassius, positioned on a hill overlooking the battlefield, misinterpreted the movements of Brutus's victorious forces as an enemy advance. His scouts, likely misinformed or simply unable to see clearly through the dust and confusion, reported a complete rout. Overwhelmed by despair and convinced of his utter defeat, Cassius retreated to his tent. In a moment of profound psychological anguish, believing all was lost and that he had failed the Republic, he ordered his freedman, Pindorus, to take his life. The tragic downfall of Cassius was a devastating blow to the conspirators, not only in terms of leadership, but also in morale. His death, born of a perceived defeat, cast a long shadow over the remaining Republican forces. Brutus, upon discovering Cassius's premature and unnecessary suicide, was plunged into an even deeper abyss of despair. He lamented the loss of his co-conspirator, acknowledging the vital role Cassius had played. The victory of his own wing now felt hollow, overshadowed by the tragic miscalculation that had cost them a crucial leader. He was haunted by the realization that his noble intentions, his desperate attempt to preserve Roman liberty, had only led to more bloodshed, more tyranny, and a seemingly endless cycle of civil war. The Republic he had sought to save seemed further away than ever, its fate now teetering on an even more precarious edge. The weight of his actions, and their unforeseen, devastating consequences, pressed down upon him, threatening to crush his spirit entirely. The Second Battle of Philippi commenced with an air of grim inevitability, a stark contrast to the chaotic fervor of the first. Brutus, despite his profound grief and the gnawing despair, rallied his remaining forces, attempting to instill in them a renewed sense of purpose. But the spirit that had once fueled their cause, the fervent belief in a restored republic, was now fractured, dimmed by Cassius's tragic end and the relentless advance of the Triumvirate. Octavian and Antony, invigorated by their partial victory and the enemy's internal strife, pressed their advantage with unyielding resolve. The clash was fierce, a desperate struggle where the Republican legions fought with the courage of men cornered, but the Triumvir's forces fought with the conviction of imminent triumph and the burning desire for vengeance. As the day wore on, the tide irrevocably turned against Brutus. His lines wavered, then broke, scattered by the sheer weight and momentum of the enemy. The battlefield became a scene of utter rout, a testament to the brutal efficiency of Octavian and Antony's coordinated attack. Brutus, witnessing the complete disintegration of his army, knew that all was truly lost. The dream of the Republic, for which he had sacrificed so much, lay shattered on the blood-soaked plains of Philippi. He retreated with a small contingent of loyal followers, seeking refuge in the darkness, but there was no escaping the crushing truth of his defeat. Under a moonless sky, Brutus, a man once revered for his honor and principles, faced the ultimate consequence of his actions. He reflected on the path that had led him from Caesar's trusted friend to his assassin, and then to a defeated general on the run. The spectre of Caesar, which had haunted his waking hours, seemed to loom larger now than ever before. With a heavy heart, convinced that his life's purpose had failed and that he could not endure the humiliation of capture, Brutus chose the same fate as Cassius. He fell on his own sword, a tragic and poignant end for a man who believed he was acting for the good of Rome, yet whose noble intentions had inadvertently paved the way for an even more absolute form of rule. His death marked the definitive end of the Republican cause and the triumph of the Avengers. With the conspirators vanquished, Octavian and Antony returned to Rome, their victory absolute, their control solidified. The Republic, for all intents and purposes, was dead, replaced by the iron will of the Second Triumvirate. Yet, the alliance forged in vengeance was inherently unstable. The seeds of discord, sown during their initial collaboration, now began to sprout with alarming speed. Octavian, ever the meticulous strategist, and Antony, the charismatic general, both harbored ambitions that could not coexist peacefully. Antony, drawn by the allure of the East and the enigmatic charm of Cleopatra, increasingly alienated himself from Roman political life. His entanglement with the Egyptian queen, a powerful and ambitious ruler in her own right, was initially a strategic alliance, but quickly blossomed into a passionate, all-consuming affair. He poured Roman resources into Egypt, lavished gifts upon Cleopatra, and began to adopt Eastern customs, all of which scandalized conservative Roman sensibilities and fueled Octavian's propaganda machine. Rome, he argued, was being betrayed by one of its own, its glory squandered for the whims of a foreign queen. The inevitable confrontation came to a head at the Battle of Actium, a monumental naval engagement off the coast of Greece. It was not merely a clash of fleets, but a decisive struggle for the very future of the Roman world. Antony and Cleopatra, commanding their combined forces, faced Octavian's superior naval strategy and the unwavering loyalty of his legions. The battle was fierce, but Octavian's admiral, Agrippa, proved to be a tactical genius. As the tide turned against them, Cleopatra, fearing capture, fled the battle with her ships, and Antony, in a desperate and ultimately fatal act of loyalty, abandoned his fleet to follow her. It was a humiliating retreat, and the Battle of Actium marked the end of Antony and Cleopatra's ambitions, leaving Octavian as the undisputed master of Rome. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Antony, consumed by despair and the ignominy of defeat, received false news of Cleopatra's death and fell upon his sword. Cleopatra, captured by Octavian, initially attempted to charm her conqueror, but realizing she would be paraded as a trophy in his triumph, chose a more dignified, albeit tragic, end. She famously allowed herself to be bitten by an asp, her final act an assertion of her will, denying Octavian the ultimate satisfaction of her public humiliation. These final, dramatic suicides left Octavian as the sole, undisputed ruler of Rome, a position he had meticulously, ruthlessly, and patiently pursued since the death of his adoptive father, Julius Caesar. The cycle of vengeance had run its course, culminating in the rise of an empire. Octavian, now the singular power in Rome, embarked upon a meticulous and transformative consolidation of his authority. The Republic, already a hollow shell, was formally laid to rest, its traditions and institutions subtly reshaped to accommodate the absolute rule of one man. He skillfully navigated the delicate balance between appearing to restore traditional Roman values and establishing an unprecedented, centralized control. In 27 BC, the Roman Senate, now largely subservient, bestowed upon him the honorific title of Augustus, a name signifying revered and majestic. This moment was not just a change of title, it marked the definitive beginning of the Roman Empire, an era of unparalleled peace and prosperity known as the Pax Romana, but also an era of absolute, unchallenged rule. The irony, stark and profound, permeated this new reality. The conspirators, Brutus and Cassius, had plunged Rome into civil war, believing they were preventing the rise of a king, a tyrant who would dismantle the Republic. Yet their desperate act had inadvertently paved the way for something far grander and more enduring. An emperor, a figure whose authority surpassed anything Caesar had dared to openly claim. They had feared a king, only to birth an emperor, proving that the currents of history, once set in motion, often lead to unforeseen destinations. Their noble intentions, however misguided in their execution, had ultimately served to accelerate the very transformation they sought to avert. The lasting impact of Caesar's assassination and the subsequent decades of civil wars reverberated through every stratum of Roman society and governance. The old senatorial aristocracy, already weakened by Caesar, was further decimated by the proscriptions and the battles that followed. A new administrative class, loyal to the emperor, rose to prominence. The vast territories Rome controlled were now governed with a more unified and efficient hand, reducing internal strife and external threats, but at the cost of the old republican freedoms. The memory of the civil wars, of the chaos and bloodshed, served as a potent justification for the Pax Romana, a peace enforced by the singular will of the emperor, a peace many Romans were willing to accept after so much turmoil. Reflecting on these tumultuous events, one discerns recurring themes of ambition, betrayal, revenge, and the complex, often elusive nature of justice. Caesar's ambition was undeniable, a force that propelled him to unprecedented heights, but ultimately invited the fatal envy and fear of those who believed in the Republic's sanctity. The betrayal by Brutus, his trusted friend, remains one of history's most poignant examples of ideological conviction clashing with personal loyalty. The relentless pursuit of revenge by Octavian and Antony, initially a shared goal, morphed into a bitter rivalry that consumed them both, leaving only one man standing. Justice, in this narrative, was not a clear-cut concept but a shifting landscape, defined by the victors and shaped by the relentless march of power. What was justice for the conspirators was tyranny for Caesar's loyalists, and what was vengeance for Octavian ultimately became the foundation of his imperial reign. The enduring legacy of Julius Caesar and his assassins is forever etched in the annals of history, a timeless drama of political intrigue, personal sacrifice, and the relentless pursuit of power. Caesar, though dead, became a divine figure, his name synonymous with imperial authority, a model for subsequent emperors. His assassins, particularly Brutus, became complex figures, alternately condemned as traitors and revered as tragic heroes who fought for a lost ideal. Their story serves as a chilling reminder that even the most powerful figures, those who shape empires and command legions, are ultimately subject to the tides of fate and the profound, often unexpected, consequences of their actions. The Roman Empire, born from the ashes of the Republic and the blood of its founders, stood as a monumental testament to these intertwined destinies.